Can you give me a few sentences, if you like, about how you would characterize the responsibilities and how do you think about those duties?
And I think all of you all know what we're supposed to have, our duties of loyalty, our duties of care, all the duties in order to enhance shareholder value. We are, elected by the shareholders, and our job is to do everything we can to provide the oversight for those companies that we oversee to ensure that we're increasing shareholder value. That's our job. And one of the biggest parts of that job, of course, is hiring and firing of the CEO and overseeing the management team, mitigating risk to the extent that we can, and a whole host of other things, but not to run the business on a day-to-day basis. I think a director has a responsibility for getting to know the management team. And if you have a CEO who says, oh no, they're off, off the chart, you don't get to do that, then you know you've got a problem. You really do need to get to know the senior management team. You need to know them beyond just having dinner with them once every quarter. And let me give you an example. I think the Home Depot, whose board I served on for about 15 years, was a great example. They had a culture of boards being required to meet with the management team, to go out and visit the stores, to talk with the associates. That's your responsibility and your obligation. In order to do that, you have to also know something about the business so that the time you spend with them is productive. And that's a part of the onboarding process. What do you go through when you come on a board? How do you get to know the management team? What kind of relationship does the CEO want you to have with them? When I became lead director of Home Depot, I had something I call the rules of engagement. And it was just a sheet of paper with things that I considered to be important as to how we as a board would work. One is that fine line between the board's role of governing and not managing the company on a day-to-day basis. One other is the demeanor in the boardroom when the management team is present and what's appropriate for everyone and what's appropriate for executive sessions. When shareholders come calling, another one is who should speak with the shareholders. And our board at Home Depot determined it would be the lead director if it wasn't the management team. We put our governance principles all online because those were related to, how we govern ourselves, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. But within the rules of engagement, mutual respect within the boardroom, among ourselves, how we deal with conflict and resolve it. You don't want everyone always on the same page in the boardroom. You want to have a healthy debate, but how you resolve that debate is important. That's what executive sessions are about. Mm-hmm. You can go into executive session and you can have a deeper dive. And if you need to bring in a third party, bring in your auditors, bring in your legal counsel, whomever, to help you get to the bottom of an issue, then I think that's
making
important.
Judicious use of the experts that you
Yes.
have access to,
Mm-hmm.
because you're really not in it all alone.
Right.
Going deeper dives and pressing management, and it is an issue that's brewing in many of the communities where private equity investors and some hedge funds put the interest of their shareholders ahead of the interest of the company. Now, that's not happened to you, but if you had to give advice to someone facing that sort of situation in a boardroom, what would you say?
Well, first and foremost, I would say that if that person was on your board, the hedge fund, and they were driving for the short term and for their investors, I would say that legally they're out of order, okay? And the reason they're out of order is because if it's not in the best interest of all shareholders, then, the board of directors has to make some decisions about how they're going to proceed with that particular shareholder and that investor. That's where shareholder engagement comes into play. You have to be engaged with your shareholders to be able to protect yourself against things that may not be in the best interest of all shareholders.
How do you feel, Bonnie, about the role of executive compensation consultants who want all their top managements to be in the top quartile? Or how do we deal with that?
I think the board has to say enough already. Executive compensation consultants are just that. They're consultants. The boards do not have to take their advice. They can listen to them. The boards should then go into their own session and determine what it is they want to do. And you can't just keep pushing to be in the top 10 percentile or the 75th or the 20th. Your company may not be performing in the 75th percentile, so why should your CEO be compensated there?
I can't conclude this conversation. I got a couple more before I open it up without talking to you about gender diversity.
I think about diversity not just in terms of gender or ethnicity, but also in terms of experience, the breadth of knowledge, cultural diversity. When we look at companies today that are really very global, diversity has to include the global nature of the world that we live in. Ella and I were talking earlier about my first board that I went on. I was approached by a search firm that said, we have this board that they're really interested in you because of, your consumer affairs background and what have you. And I said, okay, I'll talk with them. And the chairman flies into Washington in his corporate jet and meets me in the corporate airport in the conference room. He walks in and the first thing he says to me is, well, we weren't necessarily looking for a woman or a minority, but you have the background, so I guess you'll do. That was the beginning of how I started thinking about what kind of director I wanted to be. That I did not want to be pigeonholed as the black director, the female director, but as a director that brings the kind of experience and expertise that can help enhance shareholder value, that can add to the deliberations within the boardroom. That being said, do I believe that boards should be diverse? Absolutely. I served on a board once that had half of the board was women, and that was pretty cool. It was an interesting board. Just about all the boards I serve on most of them now have at least 2 women. And I think there should be more. Not many of them have African Americans or Latinos or Asian Americans. The diversity is not there. And then Ella and I were talking about where does that pipeline come from? And most often it's come from the C-suite. We have to stop thinking about the C-suite now, and we have to think about high potentials a level below or so. And I think that we have to help develop individuals in our companies like that. I've had on a couple of my boards, several of the CEOs during the course of the years have said, I need the board to help us get some of our management team on boards because it's an experience that will help them with their work here. And so we've started looking, I think many companies now, below the C-suite, not just the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, but also individuals that are one step below that. And I was really happy to see that in the recent Fortune magazine, a young woman from Home Depot that I've mentored was listed as one of Fortune's 50 most powerful women. She's not in the C-suite, okay? She's about 5 levels below the CEO. But she has a tremendous portfolio. And when you stop and think about that, she has all of the southern region. Why shouldn't we think differently when we start looking at how our boards can be diversified? And you have to look beyond the C-suite.